Welcome, everyone. This is Big A Advocacy, the parent voice at the state level. I will not waste any time, and I will turn it over to your presenters, Evie Hudak and Lisa Wow.
Okay, well, since my name is listed first in alphabetical order.
Both first and last names.
I'm Evie Hudak. I'm the State PTA Public Policy Director and chair of the Legislative Committee. And I've been in this position off and on over a couple of decades. So it is absolutely my big passion. Lisa?
I'm Lisa Weil. I am the executive director and one of the founders of Great Education Colorado, which has the vision of a Colorado where every student, no matter where they learn, how they learn, where they live, the color of their skin, the language spoken at home, that every student graduates ready to lead their best life. And what we do is we work to create grassroots advocacy and coalitions to fight for improved, equitable, adequate funding of our schools. And it has been my honor and pleasure to be on the PTA board of directors as the director at large for 4 years, and am so happy to work with PTA, which has that same vision, and has been just an incredible partner in the fight for adequate, equitable funding of our schools.
All right. So now I have to figure out.
There you go. Just click on the number on the left.
I tried that. Oh,
there you go.
Why did it not work the first time? Because, you know, whatever. So the mission of PTA is, our slogan is every child, one voice. But our mission is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. And a little note that we've been working for more than 120 years since this was first founded in 1897 as the National Congress of Mothers. We are known as the PTA now, the Parent Teacher Association. So the purposes of PTA, I highlighted 2 of the purposes. You can read all of them, but I wanted you to note C, to advocate for laws that further the education, physical and mental health, welfare, and safety of children and youth. It's not just education. It's the whole child that we're about. And several years ago, the National PTA added F, this other purpose, to advocate for fiscal responsibility regarding public tax dollars in public education funding, because this is always an issue at the national level as well as in most states. So what is advocacy? And for those of you who are at the small a advocacy, there's just a slight difference in how we're defining it here. Actively supporting a cause, idea, or policy. And achieving social change. And there are different ways you can achieve social change. Most people think of it as speaking out on behalf of other people and providing policymakers, including other voters, who in Colorado are policymakers, with information that will result in their action. But it's also educating people affected by a problem to help them be aware of their own power to create a solution. To you, Lisa.
So what we wanted to do is really make this more concrete. What are we talking about advocating for? What are the issues and concerns on your mind today? I think we've got a good group here, and so can just share if you want to put it in the chat, or I think we're small enough that you can just say, but what are the issues that are of concern? What brought you to this particular session? Anything? Class size, COVID.
Yeah, Lisa said, I was going to say it's funding, which ties, I mean, we're down here in D11 in the Colorado Springs area. So everything's always up to voters. And, you know, from a state perspective, I wanted to understand how the funding goes and how it gets balanced among the different counties, because there's different needs at different counties for different levels. And although we're a big city, we are still fighting class sizes and aging infrastructure and a bunch of other things that we just can't seem to get funding for because it's up to a voter to decide. So that's where the advocacy, you know, everything comes down to money, unfortunately, but that's the reality. And how do we couch those in terms so that we can, you know, make sure those funds go to the right places for the right reasons.
Right. Thank you, Deb. Well said. Other folks, from what's happening in the classroom to the school to the district, what are your concerns?
This is Becky. I'm from Denver. I don't know if we're able to get into this, but I feel like the board is so dysfunctional in Denver. Decisions are just not being made. And I am a huge advocate of equity, which I have always defined as bringing everybody up. And I feel like it is, for some reason, not being applied that way. And COVID has been just a slap in the face to public education. All of my friends who opted out of the public educational system, their children are getting educated and the public school kids are not. And I think we are going to have a huge hole to dig out of after this.
Thank you. And those, both the equity issues, I think what I heard you saying is that what we should be doing is making sure that everybody is coming up together and that all kids are improving and getting better schools all the time, but that equity should be catching everybody up to a higher and higher quality of education. And instead, if I heard you right, that's not happening, that it's sort of—
Correct. It feels like it's going down, unfortunately.
Okay. Anybody else want to join in here and things that are concerning? Okay. Yeah, you just want to pop something in the chat. So that second question that we have here is there a connection to state policy? Deb, you raised the issue that D11, it's really hard to get your voters to say yes, and recognize that that is true in districts all around the state for various reasons. For some districts, it's that you could raise 10 mills and it still wouldn't hire a teacher because there's so little property value. So that does get to this issue of adequate and equitable state funding. And thank you, another comment about equity. And that really is so critical now that what we want is for every student to have you want your own student to have opportunities and quality teachers and one-on-one attention. And we want that. What equity means is we want that for every child. And some kids are going to need more than others. If they have a learning disability, if they grew up in poverty, if they don't speak English yet, if, you know, so all the things that you all mentioned, the aging infrastructure, a lot of our districts have to take operating money to just keep a boiler going. Even what you were talking about, Becky, both the equity issues, that how do we make sure that everybody's going up as opposed to sort of muddling downward. And that COVID issue that it really did expose the have and have nots, and all kids have to catch up, and some kids have to catch up a whole lot more if they didn't have broadband, if they had parents who had to work and not be able to oversee their school. And so all these do come to the issue of state policies, and part of it is what the legislature can do. And part of it is what there's only one group in Colorado can do. And that is our tax policymakers, which is us. And so Deb, you raised the issue of we got to work locally, but to really raise everybody up and have the school system we want, it's got to be at the state level. So thanks for that. And I think it's back to you, Evie.
Yeah, you'll see that we are going to talk about a lot of these issues today, and also in my legislative update tomorrow at the second general meeting. So just a review that PTA has been working together for children ever since we started. I don't know if you heard about this morning, somebody mentioned, you know, one of the first things PTA did was advocate for child labor laws, because their school was not mandatory. And so a lot of children had to work most of the day and they couldn't get an education. But the National PTA has been advocating for a long time for a lot of things. We just picked some of the most important ones: hot lunch program, juvenile justice, mandatory immunization, TV content ratings, and the parent involvement provisions of No Child Left Behind and Every Student Succeeds Act. But in Colorado, we've been pretty busy too. We've been the main plaintiff in at least one school voucher lawsuit, the adequacy lawsuit, Amendment 23, the passage of it, a whole bunch of other things. And this parent involvement legislation that is mentioned here, PTA, because that's our main thing. Our advocacy has enabled parents to be more engaged in school policy making than ever before. So the basics of PTA advocacy, people might ask, well, how do we know what our positions are? How do we know where we stand? And we have an organizational process to determine what our positions are. The first one is resolutions that are passed at conventions. And we don't have any this year, but we have had them off and on over the years. And you can see all the relevant resolutions that we have passed if you go to the Colorado PTA website and click on advocacy and then click on resolutions and positions. And at the national level, you can also search for them on the National PTA website, because this is the heart. Advocating for children is the heart of what we do. And this is how we all come together as a group and say, this is what we think should be done. But because those are passed at conventions, which we only have once a year, and you might not have noticed in the bottom down here, it says resolutions to be presented to the convention must be submitted by December 31st, although we do allow emergency resolutions. Sometimes people don't get their act together in time, or an issue comes up that's urgent for us to have a position on. So the national and state boards can come up with a position statement. And National PTA, every 2 years when there's a new Congress, which is basically because everybody in the House is elected every 2 years, and a third of the Senate on the federal level and half of the Senate in the state level are reelected. So the National PTA comes up with public policy priorities. And here is a list of what they are focusing on at the national level this year. And at the National PTA Legislative Conference, we spoke to our members of Congress on most of these things. The only thing we didn't talk to them about was sensible solutions to gun violence, but it is on the National PTA's priority, and I'm sure you know why. And then Colorado PTA has legislative priorities that we come up with every year. The legislative committee comes up with things we think we should focus on in the next session of the Colorado General Assembly. And then we propose that for approval by the Board of Directors. And these are the priorities that we have come up with for this year. Number one, public school funding, which was the first thing anybody brought up when we asked you what are your concerns for advocacy. But then school and district accountability is very concerning. The accountability for educators, equity you mentioned, and of course, we never can forget about safety. And in my legislative report tomorrow, I will go into what bills we're following in each of these areas. I will just touch on a few bills at the very end of today's session if we have time. But tomorrow, I'm going to give you a better report on what bills we're actually following in each of these areas. And then we have our legislative platform, and this will be adopted tomorrow in the general session, general meeting 2. And this is broad statements on topics that are likely to be the subject of legislation. And it kind of gets bigger every year because there are a lot of issues that are really important. So I will give a brief overview of the platform. It has been emailed to you already, and I urge you to look through it before we vote for approval tomorrow. And then our greatest advocacy concern, education funding. Lisa, do you want to talk about this?
You bet. We all are working for PTA, with PTA, for our kids, because there's some things that we want for our kids, for all kids. Safe and welcoming schools. You know, you can read them yourself. Well-prepared and supported teachers, class sizes that allow one-on-one attention, like Deb mentioned. The emotional support for our kids, especially during and after COVID. You know, the schools that are looking at the whole child, like PTA's mission, not just we're trying to get them to take tests and prepare for the workforce. We want them to be the citizens of tomorrow. So Evie, if you can go to the next slide. That's not Colorado's story at the moment. So I'm going to show you some things that show that this is, and it's Colorado is kind of alone in all this. Not alone, but we are near the bottom in a way that doesn't make any sense because we have one of the hottest economies and have for the last decade. So we rank literally last in the nation on the competitiveness of our teacher wages. That means that they could make more, 33% more. That gap is with Colorado at 67%. They could make 33% more in other professions for which they're qualified with a bachelor's degree. The other way that we are at the bottom is competitiveness when you look at what it takes at the cost of living. Colorado has the biggest gap. Next slide. This just shows you the number of districts that are on 4-day weeks. If the counties that are totally in black means all their schools are on 4-day weeks. Many of them have been for quite a while. That they chose that for their usually rural small communities for various reasons, but it has increased by over 100% the number. And now most of our school districts are on 4-day weeks. And you have Brighton and Pueblo being the two biggest districts that in the last couple of years have done that. And by the way, it's not necessarily because you save money, but it's because you can be competitive for teachers. Because Brighton can't compete with Adams 12, so they can't. So they say, okay, we can't pay you more, but we can have, this 4-day week. Next slide sort of explains why and what it looks like our funding. So all you need to know about this slide is that the line across the top is how much we would be spending if we were just keeping up with inflation plus the growth in the number of students since before the Great Recession, okay? So you can see the bar below it is what's called, you may have heard the negative factor or the budget stabilization factor, which we prefer because we can shorten it to BS factor. So that is the BS factor. And when you hear that, all you need to know is that's how far behind keeping up with inflation plus growth. That's how much has been lost by districts in buying power for their students. You'll see it bottomed out at $1 billion about 3 years after the recession was over. And we slowly were making our way back up. And then COVID hit, and we have gone back to over $1 billion behind. Federal dollars have helped a little bit with that. And this year, we're going to go back to $572 million behind. So that's, when you hear people saying, oh, they put so much more money back into schools, we stayed where we were. We go back to where we were in 2019 when we're that far behind. If you add it all together, it's over $9 billion have been taken out of our schools since the Great Recession, while our economy was absolutely crushing it until COVID. Next slide. And this is just another way. That was comparing Colorado to itself. This is comparing Colorado to the nation. And again, the only thing you need to know is that black line is the national average, and the red line is how Colorado compares to the national average. So we are at $2,000 some behind the national average. So think about the school that you are working at, that is the schools that are of concern to you. Multiply the number of students in your school times 2,000, and that's what Colorado, that's how much more money would be in your school if Colorado were getting a C. So that's how we've fallen behind. You'll see various things that the voters did, including the Tabor that passed in 1992. And that's really what has squeezed our schools, even though our economy is doing better. And the other thing that has done is made Colorado voters the tax policymakers of this state, ultimately. Next slide, please. So that's where we're at. And I wanted to get that out of the way because, first we talked about where we want to be and what we hope for every student, no matter where they live or how they learn, the color of their skin. We want those safe and welcoming schools and all that whole list. And then I showed you that Colorado ain't doing it, but Colorado can. We have the wealth to do it, that's for sure. And the Constitution gives us the ability to go to the tax policymakers and ask the voters to say yes. We have been getting closer and closer all the time. And you can go ahead, Evie, to the next slide. The most important, and Colorado PTA has been a key partner in that movement. It is a movement. No one person, no one organization can fix this problem, but we can't do this without every person and every organization who cares about public education. So these organizations here are what make up the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition. And we're the ones who put Amendment 73 on the ballot. And we did it with less money than anybody ever has. And we were the first to qualify when we had to go to every Senate district and get a certain number of signatures. And that's because Colorado PTA and all these other organizations came together. We wrote the policy together, and then we had ambassadors in every community getting those signatures. And we got closer than anybody has ever come before because we did this together. The problem, the bummer is it's binary. No matter how close we got, if you don't win, you get $0. And that's why we are where we are. But we are ready to keep fighting. Colorado PTA has been part of it. And we need every local to feel the urgency that we can't do this alone. Deb, you pointed it out. Some districts can't raise money in their own district. And even those who do are still far behind where we were before the recession. So that's why state advocacy involves being at the legislature and working on all those various issues that Evie talked about. But ultimately, if we don't fix this, we cannot have the schools, the equitable schools, opportunities that we want, and teachers in the profession.
Lisa, somebody has a question about why have we declined since Amendment 23? So Can you?
You bet.
I went back to this slide so you could kind of explain that.
You bet. Absolutely. There's two things at work here. When 23 passed was right before another recession. It was when there were fires everywhere, and it was after 9/11. So we had another recession. And what happened, so what Amendment 23 did is just say, we have to increase school funding by inflation +1 for 10 years and always by inflation after that. So the first thing that happened was that it became a ceiling, because Tabor had, shrunk our ability to grow the pie as our economy grew. We kept this, artificially constricted pie of funding. So Amendment 23 protected K-12 during that first recession, which was really critical. But after that, all the other states started recovering. And when they recovered, they said, all right, we can reverse all those cuts we made to education. And so they started taking off. So remember, what this is showing is that we are falling farther behind the national average. And that's because other states were able to recover. They didn't have Tabor, and they could say, we can restore cuts and we can go beyond. Thank goodness we can invest in education again, where our state said, okay, Amendment 23, inflation +1, we're going to grow that much and not a dime more, because we can't afford it. And if we increase it more, that's going to make us have to increase it even more the next year. So we have to tamp it down because we can't afford it. So that's why we started falling behind the national average. Then came the Great Recession. And that's when they figured out how to get around Amendment 23 with that BS factor, that falling behind inflation. And I can explain how it works, but the main thing is they found a loophole, and they cut what is now, in this coming year, is $572 million. That's about $700 per kid behind keeping up with inflation. So that's why those cuts persist. And again, the economy roars back, and we were able to, we bottomed out at $1 billion behind keeping up with the cost of living, and bounced up over all those years, finally up to 572 million behind. So the problem is this artificial constriction on the amount of money that our state can spend, and there is only one group that can unlock it, and that is the voters of Colorado statewide.
And we gave them numerous opportunities over the past several years, and none of them passed.
But I'm going to go back to that hope. There were two in 2011, 2013, there were two attempts to do it. And with the second one, they spent $12 million. That was Amendment 66, and they got to 36%. When we did it our way, when we brought everybody together, when the education community from the executives, PTA, all of these two, Gifted and Talented, and the ARC and the NAACP, when we came together and we built the policy and we did the petition gathering with volunteer work, we ended up not being able to raise much money for it. We ended up spending about $1.3 million from the beginning to the end. We were outspent 3 to 1, and we got to 47%. An 11% boost with less money. The voters are with us. The no answer, vote no, it's your dough, right? You know what to do with your money better than they do, as if they were not us, right? That's what we made 11 points headway. We and created an infrastructure. PTA is a part of it. We need every local to be a part of it, and they won't be able to stop us because it comes from the bottom up. So, I will always say that Amendment 73 proves a whole lot of things. And one is that the voters are ready for this. We just have to have enough people involved and enough funding to overcome those really easy, we care about schools too, but this one, there's just a little thing wrong with it. You can always get people to vote no a lot easier than yes. We can do this if it's from the bottom up.
So our strength, as Lisa was saying, if we get everybody involved, and this is the whole point. we need you. We need our local units to be more engaged. And yes, you have to focus on, your school and your district and the things that you're doing for them. But if you're part of the state of Colorado and we need you to participate, sometimes it's when we have a ballot issue like Amendment 73. And I'm going to mention that in my presentation tomorrow, I'm going to tell you that this year we're looking for you to help oppose a ballot measure or a few that are going to make the whole funding situation even worse. So there are things that you're allowed to do. I mentioned, in order to comply with state law, the Fair Campaign Practices Act, it's important when you want to talk about a ballot measure in your school, we can do presentations and things, but please see the PTA website, click on Advocacy, then the Legislative Committee, and then under the Legislative Committee tab at the bottom are advocacy materials, and there is a PTA guidelines for ballot issues. It is very important that you make sure you follow the law in regard to what you can and can't do for advocacy on things that are on the ballot. Until it's on the ballot, you can do whatever you want. Once it's on the ballot, then we have constraints. So it's important to take note of those.
Just to clarify, Evie, once we have petitions, once there are petitions in hand, that's when the PTA, that's when those guidelines take effect.
Oh, really? Not when it's certified to the ballot?
Their title, and when you have a petition, you have to follow the guidelines.
All right. Bummer.
Sorry. But the guidelines are very, very doable.
They are. And we have had a lot of success gathering signatures. When we're opposing something, though, it's declined to sign. And that's a little more challenging than, to tell people don't sign it. Because you have to tell them what it is to tell them not to sign it, which is like advertising it. So we'll give you a lot of information about this in the future. But this all starts in the PTA Legislative Committee. We meet once or twice a month, and we look at the issues closely and then recommend positions for PTA to take. And we also do a lot of collaboration, like with the Great Schools, Thriving Communities, but not just them. I mean, depending on the issue, if it has to do with guns, we collaborate with the Colorado Coalition Against Gun Violence. If it has to do with health, we collaborate with Healthy Kids. So there are all kinds of different issues, and we collaborate with other organizations to try to do the best job we can in advocating what we think is right. And the meetings this is our general meetings are typically the second and fourth Mondays, January through April. And then on the first Monday of each month, the second Monday, but not the fourth, except this is a weird year and it might be a little different. You can attend these meetings remotely by sending a message to legislative@copta.org to get the information about the meetings. And of course, on our website, we have a big menu under advocacy. Now we are asking to make this more efficient in each local unit, that you identify somebody to be your advocacy liaison. And you put their name in the officers list, and then I get that information, or whoever the public policy director is, and we add them to our list. So they find out about meetings of the legislative committee. we want this person to be a channel of communication. And I see a question in the chat. Do you find that we reach out to collaborate more so that other organizations contacting PTA, meaning are we the tip of the spear? Sometimes we are and sometimes we aren't. It depends. Often other organizations contact us and say, can you help us advocate on this issue?
If I could just jump in here.
Yes, please.
From the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition. That's an ongoing coalition. We did 73 and then decided that we were going to stay together and keep working. I believe that PTA should be the tip of the spear. We have heard from, like in Arizona just passed a tax increase for education. And the most vocal, visible proponents were parents. And what I think that is absolutely where the board is very, that's the priority of the board, is to really engage parents in these statewide issues. That's why having a liaison, an advocacy liaison, is so important, because that's the way that you're not just seeing, here's what you do in a newsletter that you may or may not get to that article in it, but that there's somebody at every meeting who says, okay, this is what's coming. They say that we're going to have petitions in a couple months, and here's what the policy is going to be. Let's get started to think about this, because if it's up to our locals to really be the muscle, right? I mean, that's where the power is. And so if we have those liaisons in every local, and we absolutely can lead this thing and should.
Right. And so we're just asking this person to be a liaison, literally a link between the state PTA and the local unit. So there's at least one person at your PTA meeting who pays attention to advocacy issues and talks about things that are happening, not just at the state level, but also at the school level and the district level, as you may have heard in the previous workshop, small a advocacy. And then it's recommended that you attend trainings, because typically one of the things PTA does is we do trainings. And we always have advocacy trainings at our council and region trainings in the fall. And then there are many other ways to make a difference. Lisa mentioned some of these, especially in terms of sign up with Great Education Colorado. But, you know, pay attention to your school and district accountability committees, because those are policy, they're advisory, but they have a lot to do with making recommendations on policy. And of course, your school board does. So Lisa put in the chat a link that is more detailed than just greateducation.org for you to sign up.
Right, and there are a lot of different options on there. The schedule of presentation is something that that's key. I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. When I was in PTA in Denver at my kids' schools, it felt like there was some unease that doing something like carrying a petition or taking a stand on a ballot issue felt political. And that's just a word, you know, what it is the heart of PTA. It's advocating for your child and all children, and you can't do it. We can't succeed if folks who care the most are shying away from it because it feels like it's not PTA's place, when in fact that before the fundraising and the other things that PTAs have had to pick up because of the bad funding, it really is the heart of PTA. And so getting a presentation is sort of the first step to just hearing the detail. I mean, I don't know how many of you knew how far behind the national average Colorado had fallen. Deb did. And I can't see anybody else. You know, there are just some things that people need to know. There are some things, one of the things that we're really trying to do is lift people's eyes up beyond, let's just reverse cuts to, what do you want your school to look like? What would be, you know, not just like, should we take these extra dollars that we have to put paraprofessionals in the lower grades or to have a music person? Instead, it's, let's have a music person. Let's think about the mental health supports that our kids would have. What kind of interventions do we want to have? Let's think bigger. And that's what scheduling a presentation is, just sort of that first, let's talk about what Colorado's story could be. Here's where we are, but we can do this together. And it takes hearing it a few times. So scheduling a presentation in the last couple of months, last month now, this year, and again in the fall, we do it in conjunction with PTA. That's why I was so excited when I was asked to be on the board, is because we could work together. And yes, Becky, we are absolutely happy to once people are traveling, we will travel. Right now, Grade Ed will do a presentation. We're just actually having somebody redo our presentations, making it really, really cool, very much about equity and a whole lot better looking than what we've done in the past, and just more engaging. So yes, please sign up for a presentation. If you go to that link, one of the options is to sign up for a presentation. We will get back to you, and we will tailor it to 5 minutes or a half hour, a conversation, whatever you want, because this is how it happens.
So I will add Becky Wiggins to my list, and we are always willing to make presentations. You know, if you're having in-person meetings and we can't come in person, you know, we're willing to Zoom in, and you could put it on a big screen and everybody could see it. There are ways for us to be able to make presentations to you and your local group. And the butterfly effect, I always talk about that, is like, you know, maybe you only have 10 people there. Maybe we only have 14 people in this workshop, but it's the butterfly effect, because now you go and you're better educated on this. And then when you're interacting with other people, you can always remember, oh yeah, if we had better funding in Colorado, we could take care of that issue. I mean, most of it comes down to funding. And there are other things for advocacy. You know, in general, take an active interest in key issues that affect children and youth. There are a lot of them. And, you know, let your ears perk up when you are listening to the news and you hear things. Know who your legislators are at the state level and the national levels. Very few people do, but there are ways that it's pretty easy to find out who they are. And don't forget, there are people who represent you in your city or town, in your school district, at your county. And actually, a lot of the decisions those people make affect your child's health and education and well-being. And overall, be an informed voter. Register to vote if you're eligible to register to vote, and then vote. And if you need any suggestions for how you should vote on issues, we're glad to help you. As far as candidates go, PTA is nonpartisan. We cannot tell you who to vote for, but we can tell you how to find out information about the candidates so that you can decide for yourself who you want to vote for. And then I just wanted to mention some of the hot topics at the legislature. I'll go into a few more tomorrow, but just so you see, Senate Bill 53, adjustments to school funding, this was really huge because the initial budget for, the budget for every year is done the previous year. So when they initially did the budget for this year with the pandemic, they assumed that that the state would really be losing an awful lot of revenue. And so they made huge cuts. They doubled the negative factor, for example. I know Lisa always calls it the budget stabilization factor or the BS factor, but I call it the negative factor because it literally is a minus. So they doubled the negative factor. And so when the revenue actually came in, it was like, wow, we didn't really lose all this money. So this one bill put money back into school funding that would have been there if they hadn't been ultra conservative in their guesswork for school funding. And this is our current school year. Now, one of the things that typically happens during recessions is that the budget is passed the previous April or May, and then the school year starts and you get, that's how much money you get. But come January, when they look at the actual revenue that came in, they have to make adjustments. And usually in a recession, the adjustments are down. In other words, we told you you were going to have $10 million, but guess what? We don't have it. So we're only going to give you 9. But you already hired the teachers. And so what are you supposed to do in the middle of the school year? And so this bill saved us in the middle of this school year. It was really, really good. And that's why I wanted to spend so much time talking about it. But other bills I'm going to talk about, you know, the statewide assessments that were and weren't suspended. Safe storage of firearms. It looks like this building is headed to the governor and he will sign it. And this is something that PTA has advocated for since the late 90s. Okay, so for over 20 years, we have tried to get this law passed, and it's finally going to happen. So that's all I have. So in the chat, there is the evaluation for you to fill out. And we have a few more minutes. So what questions does anybody have? Or what do you want to talk about?
Can I ask a question of folks here? Do you feel barriers to advocacy? Do you feel that what does something get in your way, or you know, how can we make it easier? Or are there ways?
Lisa, this is Mike Sullivan.
Hey, Mike.
Hi. I was going to mention something that you got at about local units feeling. I started off as an advocacy liaison years and years ago, and there was a lot of resistance at both the elementary and middle school where I served that role about people reluctant to be political. They said that we're PTA, we're not political. And I wanted to piggyback on something Evie mentioned, which is actually we are. What we are not is partisan. And that is an important distinction. And that people conflate partisan and political was a barrier for me as an advocacy liaison. And I think when I was able to communicate that distinction, it broke down that barrier.
Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful. Does that ring true for folks? I'm getting sort of a yes from Deb, clapping from Mari.
Yeah, Mike, that's a good point. I said I actually was approached by a teacher who didn't agree with one of the advocacy measures from, I don't know how many years ago, but that turned them off of all of PTA. They're like, we love what you do at the school, but we're not going to get involved. I'm not going to pay dues to something that I don't agree with. And I'm like, I kind of, it's getting past the, it's a one and done type of situation. And I encourage him and said, well, you have a voice if you're involved to say whether or not you agree with something. By just blatantly, I said, here's an organization that's advocating for teachers, behind the scenes almost. And if you don't get involved and put forth your voice, then you'll never have a sway in what they do for you. So it was a little disheartening to get that, but that was one of the barriers. So Mike, thanks for bringing that up. But one of the barriers I have from a high school perspective, it's just a huge community, and to get a clean, crisp, concise message out to everyone. The little postcards and things for ballot measures and so forth, or where we stand, we use websites, but it's getting that message out quickly to people so that they can move on, because I won't get them to come to a meeting. I won't get them to watch a video, maybe a video, but to get that message across in a way that they find where they fit into that message and agree or don't agree with it. So that's where I need help, is getting that information out quickly, timely, and people will listen if you can do it in a, I hate to say soundbite, but that's the culture we're in. And it's a complicated issue. It's always been a complicated issue. So people look at it as, oh, it's a tax increase or not.
Right.
It's like, no, it's more than that. So thanks for the questions and the explanation of a lot of the amendments and where what we thought was funding towards this, towards education, hasn't really come through, because that's where everybody sees is, we've already paid for this. Why are we asking for more? That's the so we need to get a better education for people, is to see where funding is going or not coming to fruition. Thanks.
And another thing that, you said that it's, we end up talking about it's a tax, right? It's a tax or it's not a tax. I just heard a person talking about how to sort of change narratives. And I thought this was such a great analogy. She said, if you're walking through the in the grocery store, you see a box of Duncan Hines and there's a brownie on it. And that's what you think of. Oh man, I want brownies. That picture makes you throw it into your cart. They do not say, on the front cover, this is a box of powder. If you take this powder and put your own eggs and oil and, thyme and mixing into it, you're going to have brownies. And we always end up letting our opposition saying it's just powder and it's not even worth it. We don't paint the picture of the brownies. And that's why being much more aspirational, and that's why, those phrases that I had on those slide are ones we're going to just keep saying: welcoming and safe schools, individual attention that meets all our kids where they are, well-supported teacher. We just have to have those, coming off our tongue, so that when this is the education ballot measure, not this is the tax ballot measure. And we have to make sure that we're not saying we're trying to get you to take this powder.
Good analogy.
Isn't that good?
Yeah.
That really captured me.
Yeah.
Being a baker on the other end of that, it was like, oh, that totally makes sense.
Well, it's 5 to 12, and we're supposed to try to end the workshop 5 minutes before the hour. Next is your lunch break. It's very short. It's only until 12:15. So if we give you another 5 minutes, you'll have a whole 20 minutes to go and put a lunch together for yourself. And then
that's because we're having a speaker during our lunch. So it's kind of that, take a quick break and then
right.
kind of like we would at convention, right? Sit down and have a speaker.
Make your lunch and then bring it to the screen. And
well, thank you all. A great conversation. And,
all right, thank you all.
Hope to see you on Monday after Monday evenings, or every other Monday evening, or whichever it is. You'll find out.
Second and fourth.
Second and fourth. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Evie and Lisa, for presenting on behalf of Colorado PTA. We appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.